Okay. Thanks everybody for signing on today for the webinar that we are doing here. My name is Ross Eisenberg. I'm Vice President of Energy and Resources Policy with the National Association of Manufacturers. With me is Laura Berkey-Ames, Director of Energy Resources Policy. She essentially manages the day-to-day operations of the Sustainability Task Force here at the NAM. I would encourage you to get to know Laura if you have not to date. We're pleased to partner today with the Institute for the Future, IFTF, and the Global Environmental Management Initiative, or GEMI, and bring you guys this webinar on a new project proposal that these two groups have that would be to develop a custom forecast that will point to a 10-year list on external future forces, including both threats and opportunities that will disrupt sustainability with a focus on business choices and business strategy. So the idea here is every business line is getting disrupted. Sustainability is no different, and so what is coming on the horizon? We worked with GEMI about a year ago on a similar webinar on sustainability issues. We're pleased to partner with them again, and certainly with given that the NAM has a lot of common members with these groups as well. So with that background, I will turn over to one of those common members, Bill Gill, AVP of Environment with Smithfield Foods, who is who's not only a member of the NAM Sustainability Task Force, but chair of GEMI. So, Bill, with that, let me turn it over to you and get the ball rolling.
All right, very good. Thank you, Ross. First, let me touch on the antitrust guidelines because GEMI is an organization made up of a variety of different companies and interacts with a lot of different companies. We post our antitrust guidelines here as part of all of our meetings and gatherings. I obviously won't read through the whole thing, but if anybody starts to feel uncomfortable in terms of venturing into some kind of antitrust area, I guess please use the chat function or somehow notify us so that we can be aware of that and then steer the conversation back in the proper direction. I don't foresee any issues, but just in case, anyway, bear that in mind as we go through the webinar today. All right, with that, just a little bit about GEMI. GEMI, like I said, is a group of actually fairly diverse companies, and so we work together kind of in a sort of a three-pronged approach to sustainability and in environmentally related matters and issues. Of course, we try to be a leader in that we like to look out and see what's coming, what's happening. As an example, of course, this particular webinar, but we like to function as a leader and be on the edge, the cutting edge of sustainability and environment, so that our companies can be aware of that. The way we learn about what's on the cutting edge is through meetings. So we bring in sort of experts in various fields on various topics, and then the individuals from our company that may have a particular experience, and we get together and we talk about the issue and some of the challenges and opportunities associated with that issue. But what we do is, of course, the third step, most importantly, is then based on that we try to develop a solution. Whether it's a quick guide, some kind of water tool, a map of the future, similar to what you see here, and come up with solutions that our member companies can actually utilize. And of course, there's a good bit more of information on our GEMI website. So that we'll take a look here at the next slide, obviously, we don't expect you to read this as well, but this is actually the forecast map that we produced back in 2007 with the Institute for the Future and Bob Johansen. And being part of that process was very helpful. It makes the map much easier to read because we know the basis and we understand why some things are circles and different colors and different columns. And whatnot, and I won't go into all those details, but I think we found, this is back in 2007, really, that the forecast that we worked with the Institute on actually turned out to be very helpful. I think something for me and my company that came out of the process was that we started to see that citizens and stakeholders were going to become the regulatory agencies of the future, so to speak. That individual citizens group would start to rise up, and they would be collecting data and information, and they would be going to companies to tell them what they expected to do. Also, I think we saw a little bit of an us or them mentality starting to develop, in that you're kind of either for us or you're against us. You can't be in the middle and say, well, both sides have good points. That makes you an outlier. You need to either be on our side or be on their side, so we know how to deal with you. We also saw that kind of with this sort of positioning and citizen stakeholder activity, that science wasn't the golden be all that it was at one point in time, that people even began to distrust science in terms of how to address and deal with specific situations. And my guess is most of you say, well, yeah, Bill, that's obvious. We all know that. But 10 years ago, this was nearly not as obvious or in place as it is now. So for companies to be able to see these things and look forward, I think was valuable and an important development. And certainly we utilized the map and the information at Smithfield Foods to kind of inform our process going forward and how we would gear our sustainability program. So with that, I'll turn it over to the expert in terms of the map and forecasting, and that would be Bob Johansson with the Institute for the Future. Worked with Bob on a couple different projects, and have met him and read some of his books. And so hopefully you'll be as impressed as I am with the capabilities of him and his team in looking forward and seeing where current trends will take us. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Bob.
Great. Thanks so much, Bill. And I invite all of you with the chat function to send out some questions. I am an interactive medium, so I prefer to be interactive, and we're happy to share our latest forecast with you. But we want to start by looking back 10 years to the forecast we did with GEMI just a little more than 10 years ago now, 2007. And I ask you just to kind of think back to that period and the pressures and the uncertainties we were facing then, and then compare that to where we are now. And then the focus of this new project is to look 10 years ahead from now. So to look from 2018 out to 2028, 2030, something like that. And I'm here with my colleague, Ari Gentry, who has been spending a lot of her time. She's an economist by training, but when we discovered her, she had founded an amazing group here in Silicon Valley called BioCurious. So she's been very engaged with the whole notion of citizen engagement and citizen science and what we call this whole notion on the map of citizens of sustainability. So Ari, just let me, I have a quick introduction to you, and then we'll kind of give you a taste of the forecast.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. So this is Ari, and I'm a research director at the Institute. And I have a focus on science, technology, and society. So the background in economics, but also working with scientists, both professional, independent, up and coming. We're seeing a couple of things. So the transition of a lot of people from different backgrounds, from art to software development, wanting to be bioengineers. There's that big shift happening. And like you mentioned, these individuals really want to be stakeholders in the future that they're helping develop. And that's coming together in community spaces, both in person, like in BioCurious, and our extended global community. So I'm able to lend that aspect of distributed science, technology, and communities to our work. And at IFTF, we work with a lot of large organizations. I particularly work with a lot of food, pharma, oil and gas, and technology companies. And right now we're actually involved in a very large scale project on the future of climate action with a global development organization. So we're really excited about how these overlaps will come together in this potential new project.
Great. So let's introduce a little bit more about the Institute, because it is an unusual group. We're an independent nonprofit think tank in Silicon Valley, a 501c3, and it's in downtown Palo Alto, adjacent to Stanford. We have a futures gallery here where we do public events, and we also have blended reality underground caverns. This was the city of Palo Alto's first post office. And we have these wonderful caverns underground that we've turned into immersive learning environments using virtual, mixed, and augmented blended reality experiences. We were founded in 1968, so we were a spinoff of RAND and SRI International, what was then called Stanford Research Institute. The early funding was from DARPA and NSF. I believe we're now the longest running futures think tank in the world, and 2018 is our 50th anniversary, so it's very humbling for us. And part of what we're doing now is just appreciating that current 50 years that we have under our belt now. That's actually, if you ever meet a futurist, the first question you should always ask is, have you outlived your forecast? And we have many times over. We actually keep track, and 60 to 80% of our forecasted futures have actually happened, depending on your definition of happened. But it turns out that's not the way to evaluate a futurist. That's the way to evaluate a fortune teller. The way you evaluate us is, does the forecasted future provoke an insight that leads to action? I ran the Institute for 8 years and then asked our board to let me go back to doing what I love to do, which is write books about the future, do workshops, and also do custom forecasts. So these are some of the recent ones that I've led or co-led. Walmart, of course, was a big player in business sustainability. They, I believe, coined the term business sustainability. We work closely with their CEO, Doug McMillan, and have been looking at external future forces likely to disrupt their business. United Rentals, the world's largest equipment rental company now, GlaxoSmithKline, we're all focused there on the future of digital disruption in the pharma and vaccines and health area. Disney, was all about theme parks. P&G about advertising in the future. Syngenta about the future of food. Nestle about kids in food. Takeda about mutual benefit partnering. SNHU is Southern New Hampshire University, one of the world's leading online universities now. And finally, Ari and I were deeply involved with the Y here in the US and the future of the Y. So you can see a wide range of organizations with which we work. Here's the essence of what we do. This is the Institute's logo, originally designed on an Etch-a-Sketch, and it says IFTF, but it's very hard to read at this distance. But if you hold it back, the further you hold it back, the more clear it becomes. And that's the secret. That's the secret of what we do. It's actually easier to do 10-year forecasting than 1 or 2 year forecasting. So what we want to do now is do that same thing for business sustainability, for the external factors likely to disrupt sustainability looking 10 years ahead, using this foresight, insight, action approach. And here's how we do it. We always begin from hindsight, because whenever you think about the future, you inevitably have to deal with people's stories about the past and the present and the future. We all have these stories. The neuroscientists call them our personal neural story net. And we have to break into those stories with foresight. So foresight is a story from the future. It's plausible, it's internally consistent, it's provocative, and it has signals to bring them to life. We're very influenced by the novelist William Gibson and his insight that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And our job is to pull out those signals. We call this futures thinking, and it's used to provoke your insight. So you don't really have to agree with our forecast to find it useful. You only have to be provoked by it. And an insight is an aha. It's much more than an idea. It's a new story, essentially, a new pattern of connections in your brain. And once you've had an insight, you can't go back. You can't go back. So we're looking for that. How can we create foresight that provokes insight. And we tie that in with design thinking, which we have great respect for. So if you combine futures thinking, 10 years ahead, working backwards, with design thinking to help innovate out of the present, you have the potential for a custom forecast. And that's what we did for GEMI 10 years ago, and what we want to do for you all looking 10 years ahead now, to feed into your strategy. So typically we're working with CEOs or heads of strategy or heads of innovation, and sustainability is just one of the themes we deal with. In this case, we want to focus more deeply on what you all do in your everyday practice. And the goal is to have an impact on action, to come up with an agile way forward expressed with clarity and ideally as a story. And leaders like you all fit kind of right in the middle of foresight, insight, action. And the big thing about this world, this next decade, is the term we use now is the term coined at the Army War College, where I teach now, the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. You need to get out of the present because the present's too noisy. You need to look 10 years ahead and then come back, come up with that foresight, insight, action cycle. And we always remind people, nobody can predict the future, even though we're good at anticipating, nobody can predict. It's a VUCA world. And if somebody tells you they can predict the future, you shouldn't believe them, especially if they're from California. So here's the map. Here's the map we did for GEMI. Bill showed this to you first, and of course you can't read it at this resolution. But here were the 6 key drivers from the left side, and Bill gave you the link so you can go back and look at the original. I'm happy to drill down in this call with Ari to talk about any portion of the map. But what I'd really like to do is share with you our thinking about the next 10 years already and kind of where we'd like to go. But these are the 6 drivers. And I should say we've been doing custom forecast maps now for more than a decade. This was the 5th or 6th we had done. We began doing this about 15 years ago. This is, by our current standards, too busy. We've decided that less is more with this kind of thing, and that in terms of drivers, 3 is usually not enough, 6 is too many, 4 is better than 5. But we had 6 in this map, an imperative for looking long. In this VUCA world, looking 10 years ahead is actually easier than looking just at the present and kind of inching your way out. The planet at risk, it was obvious 10 years ago, but it's even more obvious now that things are happening. And the Institute for the Future is not an advocacy group. We're an independent nonprofit, big picture futures group. But we started studying climate disruption in 1977. So as far as I know, we're the longest running futures group that's actually paid attention to this. And it's obvious something is happening. It's just a question of whose models you believe as to how bad it is or how much of a challenge. This notion of marginal populations redefine the mainstream. That's things like immigration, which is dramatically more important now than it was a decade ago, but also populations that are affected that we haven't counted as heavily as we had before. And this notion of participatory culture, not just top down, but bottom up, the potential to create new commons. I wrote a book since then called The Reciprocity Advantage with Carl Rahn from Procter & Gamble, all about mutual benefit partnering models to innovate. And finally, a new material world. And here, Ari, I wonder if you could give us just a quick taste of that, because here's where you're deeper than I am on citizen science and on these new developments in the material world and biology and the science of sustainability, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So a new metaphor is kind of driving this set of forecasts where biology and materials are now subject to engineering. So systems thinkers and engineers from different disciplines are starting to come to this. You see scholars from computer science starting to apply these metaphors like biological computing. designing things like biobricks, which are meant to be interchangeable parts designed like a circuit. So you can actually control the physical world that we're living in. And now that it's 10 years hence from this forecast, we're starting to talk about these manipulating the physical world, both in terms of biology and technology hand in hand, which is taking this forecast so much further. And that was in one of our forecasts, When Everything is Media, that we're happy to share with you all.
Good. So here are the columns. This is obviously what we call a matrix map, and the columns are more impact areas. So if you think of the drivers, those are the driving forces. And again, recall this was 2007. So what were the driving forces? And then here are the impact areas on people, on regions, on built environments, so like cities, for example, on nature more generally, on markets, on business, and on energy. And these columns were designed to reflect the membership of GEMI at the time, and also to give a comprehensive view of this whole space of sustainability or business sustainability. And then on the map itself, the circles represent what we call hotspots, which are opportunities to innovate. So each of them is both a threat and an opportunity. And then the banners are what we call signals. So that's the future that's already here, but unevenly distributed. And you see the pictures around there are mostly examples of signals, actual products or services. There are books that illustrate that future that's beginning to unfold. So at this point, I want to try to turn back now to the chat function and any questions you have. We're prepared to drill down on any aspect of the map, but we're also hoping we might talk more about what we'd like to do next. On the back side of this map is a completely text summary of the forecast. So what we found is that many people are visual thinkers and we like to have the big picture visual, but also a lot of us like to have the text summary. So the other side of the map is all text, and it's a fold out kind of an accordion sort of thing, like an old fashioned map before the days of GPS. One of the panels on the back of the map talks about the shift that's happening. And here I invite you now to ask questions through the chat function or make comments. One of the panels talks about the world of dilemmas and the fact that as you move into the VUCA world now, thinking 10 years ahead, we'll still have problems that can be solved, but the problems are the easy part. The bigger issue, particularly in the sustainability space, is problems you can't solve completely, but you can make better. So the challenge is how to avoid judging too soon, which is the classic mistake of the problem solver, and also avoid deciding too late, which is the classic mistake of the academic. So as people engage with sustainability, we have to be really comfortable in that space of dilemmas and the space of figuring how even if you can't solve, you can make things better, you can win. And often winning is not just I win, you lose. It's figuring out what are the mutual benefit partnering opportunities here. And while a group like GEMI is really looking for those opportunities for synergy, if you will. So at that, I'm going to do a pause and just kind of open it up. I'll leave the screen. I'm just going to go back to my slide sorter space here. And I can come back and summarize more of that if you would like, but I'd like to get your questions or your comments at this stage.
Bob, this is Kellen Mahoney.
Yeah, good. Please.
Yes, so we've got one question here in the chat box. The question for you, Bob, has the forecast been accurate, such as relating to the planet at risk and the response to businesses and markets?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. But recall that the way that you evaluate a forecast is not does the does the forecasted future actually happen? That's the way you evaluate a fortune teller. It's, does the forecasted future provoke an insight? And there it would vary for company to company. So here's the summary, for example. If you look at the Planet at Risk forecast and drill down at it in more depth, the imperative for looking long, looking across the column, has a demographic element. That's kind of the easy part. That is relatively predictable. But what we said in terms of Planet at Risk was under people and eco health literacy and kind of volatile feedback that happens. And maybe Ari, you can jump in a little bit there as far as eco health literacy. Yeah, basically what this means is that we've got on the map citizens of sustainability is the other area, and I'm going to just pop that up for the moment.
The map also talks about eco-consumers and that converging with technology, the ability to almost make these pop-up communities of people who share your values across global citizenry. That's happening just so frequently and being tied to more and more business models. So for example, looking up an organization or a product in order to determine their green score or their good score, whatever that score may be. But these are operating more like social networks. So bringing together both these new values across the change in technology.
Yes, exactly.
One shift.
And if you move across then a bit on the top there, you can see, I'm looking out here. So this again moves into Ari's home court, the intersection of economics and eco science. If you think 10 years ago, when GEMI first started, which is 25 years ago, it was mostly health and safety and people who were kind of thinking about the world in that way. When we did this forecast, it was kind of the beginning of sustainability linking to strategy. But a lot of the members were more focused on corporate social responsibility. And within some of the GEMI members who used the map, they used it as a way of starting a conversation, which is one that we facilitated and had some role in at Procter & Gamble, for example, or at Carnival Cruise Lines. And it was bringing together this notion of sustainability with the notion of business success. Mm-hmm. And this was at the beginning of the time Walmart coined the term business sustainability, which I always liked. But Ari, can you jump in just on this shift? Because if you think back 10 years ago, this movement was really just beginning. And now you can see it scaling in a way. You can make the case now for sustainability. And in a real sense now, we're depending on the government less for regulation, and we're depending on business more for looking at ways of encouraging sustainability in ways that kind of do good while doing well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So now you see companies starting to display a badge of honor, that they're sustainable, eco-friendly, and like we talked about in the beginning of this call, this is kind of old news by now, but the point is, doing this in 2007 and sort of provoking conversation about the shifts that will inform our longer term strategy. And now I kind of look to the products that I use on a daily basis. I'm looking for the ingredients that are at least proven by science to date not to harm the environment, not to harm my body. You see this blend of the science kind of informing the consumer products. And when I'm looking at a product on Amazon, you see a dissection of the ingredients. These are very savvy consumers who are now becoming authorities. You might not necessarily know their background, and they may not have a kind of the well-respected background that an authority figure of the past may have, but they're driving the behavior of the people who are participating in these economies. So that's a really big shift that we're seeing more and more of, and it's also questionable whether these people are the right authorities, but nonetheless, they're becoming the drivers of human action.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing, and Bill mentioned this earlier. There's cases where science is being viewed more skeptically now by citizens, by politicians, and that's not always a good thing. You know, sometimes it's ignoring good science and bringing in junk science. So it isn't always a good thing. But on the other hand, there is definitely evidence, and we've had another question here. At what point in time do you see sustainability being business as normal? I think it already is at some companies. If you look at the more leading edge companies, and you know, you all know those better than we do across the board, we know the ones that we experience, but it's a more normal part of the conversation now than it was 10 years ago. And the challenge is how can businesses pick up this responsibility, even if the regulators aren't doing it themselves? So there's a lot of debate now. As you look 10 years ahead, the forecast, and this takes us from the current forecast to the new forecast, the word that I use to describe the next decade is the word scramble. Scramble. That's the key forecast. So it's not only a VUCA world, it's going to get worse. It's going to be a scramble. But in a real sense, it can get better too. So, you know, I've been doing this 30 plus years. This is the most frightening 10-year forecast I've ever done. And it's the most optimistic. And both are true. So in this world, the scramble, there's going to be forces at work, particularly in the regulatory part of the world, around the world, not just here. There's many things that have been stuck that will get unstuck, and that includes regulations. However, the people doing the unsticking will not necessarily be good at putting them back together again. So you're going to see many more unintended consequences, which make it a ripe time for innovation. And the innovation, I think, will happen in this space. So you can see now the opportunity to build in sustainability as one of the things that people consider important as part of their strategy.
We've got some more questions.
So yes, okay. So here's another question. The forecast I looked up online for 2007-2017. Are you planning to update it? I'm glad you asked. Yeah, yes, exactly. That's what this call is all about. So we, you know, most of what was forecasted here has happened. So I know I said earlier, 60 to 80%. The way I look at it, I don't see anything big that we missed. So this one might be 80 or 90%, depending on how you count. But yes, that's exactly what we'd like to do. And Steve Hellam, I wonder if you could jump in at this point, because you and I have had this conversation about doing this update of the forecast. And we have a proposal now that we're happy to share with you all. That's exactly what we want to do next, is to take this base forecast, learn from it, but now look ahead out to 2028 or 2030. And we want to do that through GEMI, but we also are setting it up. Steve and his team have organized this so that it can include not only GEMI members, but others that just want to participate in this particular forecast code. So Steve, would you be able to jump in at this point and answer this question? And I know we're starting to approach the end of our time together, but this is probably the right time to introduce what it is we are suggesting, which is, are you planning to update it? Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you, Bob. Thank you, Ross, Laura, Bill, Bob, Ari. We very much appreciate you all taking the time this afternoon to give us an opportunity to kind of share this with you. That question was a perfect one because, yes, I mean, while that initial map was done over 10 years ago, I will tell you it was quite a spread. It would spread to about 3 feet wide, but we had actually shared about 3,000 of those. We went through 2 different printings of those. They went all over the globe. It went to all sorts of policy, legislative, regulatory, other kinds of folks. But I will share with you that GEMI is not an advocacy organization. We don't do legislative regulatory work. So the scoping of this document is designed to really provide you all as individual organizations with information that you can then plan and develop your own strategies on based on your own objectives. We are in this is this slide that just came up. We are both the GEMI members, and this is something kind of new for us. We're looking outside the GEMI membership to other organizations and other entities to participate and be part of the development of this map. I will tell you, and all of our members would talk about this. One of our key folks, in addition to Bill, is a guy named Mitch Jackson from FedEx. Remember very well having a good working session out in Palo Alto where we had about 30, 35 folks sitting around the table really trying to figure this whole thing out. So that while that map of 10 years ago included a lot of different information and directions, this map is designed to be a little bit more refined, but the same goal, hopefully having 25, 30 major organizations and representatives with real good brains sitting and thinking about those future trends, and then utilizing the expertise of the Institute for the Future to put that in a package so it's actionable and can lead all of you to your own next steps. So we're inviting you folks on the phone. We also have an active effort going on, Eco Forum and other forums, thanks to Mitch Jackson, where we're trying to share this information and this project. Our goal is to raise, basically, we need to raise about $150,000 to $200,000. There's no need to mince words in the context of the package, but I will tell you what's exciting about this. Those will basically come in about each individual organization, about $15,000 a company. But the great thing about it is that joint work, the ability to be able to sit around the table with different sectors, oil, chemical, paper, mining, autos, other people that are thinking about the future but may not be thinking about it the same way your sector is. So the ability to be able to look at that, look at this future mapping mechanism and do that with other folks from other sectors. That's what we're really all about. I will tell you, if you were trying to do a map like this for your own entity, and obviously there are great companies that have done them, like the Procter & Gamble's and other folks, it would cost you an awful lot more money, but would totally be useful and totally target on your organization. With this being focused on the sustainability, it really gives all of the collective folks sitting around the table the opportunity to work in a process. So it's not just, this is not, we say, it's not we get together, we go to the Institute for the Future, we say, give us the future. That's not it. This is an engaged working session of good thinking leaders of major organizations talking about the future and then putting that in a package so that it can be utilized in various ways for individual companies. Is a cost-sharing mechanism. We really think it's a cost-effective way to get the results that you all may be looking for, and we would very much welcome all of you to either give us a call if you'd like to talk more about it, if we could do an in-depth overview for your folks, and we've done that, where we get a couple, three folks from, say, a company together that want to learn more about the process, because people, different folks with different backgrounds are coming at these issues from different perspectives, but it really is a great collaborative opportunity for your individual company to be asking these kind of questions. And I think it's a real leadership opportunity too for the companies. So we would invite you all to take a look at not only the information that Bob and the folks shared with you today, but if you have questions, don't hesitate to either call Kellen or myself. The GEMI website, all of our contact information is on the GEMI website at www.gemi.org. And we'd be welcome, again, any additional questions that you all may have right now as we start to wind down on our time frame. Are there additional questions that you all would like to ask? And if so, please use that mechanism on your for that questioning mechanism for the so that we can address those questions.
Yes, and thank you, Steve, for giving that update. This is Bob again. I'll just add a little bit as you're asking for questions and give you some time to ask. This is, as Steve said, this is an unusual opportunity. And the reason we're doing this and the reason we're pricing it and the way we're pricing it as part of our nonprofit responsibility, I think this is a topic that we all need to engage with. And while we're not an advocacy group either, we are a conversation starting group. And this is a topic about which we want to not just begin, but engage in a deeper conversation. So this is different from our normal custom forecasts we normally do, which are with a single company and are typically priced, as Steve said, considerably more than this. We're more looking here to start a cross-industry conversation and build on the conversations that are already underway. But you can then take that and run with it in your own company to feed it into your own individual strategy. Okay, so what does Scramble stand for? Boy, if I was smart, I would have turned that into an acronym, but it's not an acronym. So VUCA was originally a term used at the Army War College. If you look at my current book called The New Leadership Literacies, and maybe Steve, would you mind putting a reference to that book just on the GEMI website?
I'll be glad to. Sure, of course.
That book has the definition of VUCA and a summary of Scramble. The negative definition, which the Army War College coined, is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I've flipped that into a positive, which I teach there now, which is what I argue is if you look 10 years ahead, volatility yields to vision. So vision gets rewarded disproportionately. Uncertainty yields to understanding. It has to be a time when we listen, not just shout. Complexity yields to clarity. And what's this actually news in the last decade, and again, it comes from the military. The big lesson in the VUCA world is what wins is to be very clear where you're going, but very flexible how you get there. That's what they call commander's intent or mission command, or the latest term is flexive command. And then finally, ambiguity yields to agility. We all have to be agile. But Scramble is not an acronym. It's just a word, a kind of a messed up, jumbled sort of present that we're all facing as we think toward the future. But the Scramble has some real opportunities immersed in it. This is a time of great innovation if we play it right and if we avoid the polarities of the present.
Let me take another question that basically is GEMI membership global. How does the process work to involve global company input? I would say all of our companies that are members either of GEMI or are parts of our various projects are indeed global in their reach. The process that we would use is each of our companies have the ability, if they're going to participate in the project, to engage and bring in whatever representatives they would like from wherever those folks would be. We want to keep it, we don't want to get it too large, but certainly the global impacts on all of our companies would be the ones that have different perspectives, different thoughts, different approaches, etc. So that we are global in the context of most of our companies are U.S. based, but they all have global operations. We've done a lot of work with global oil and gas industry representatives, et cetera, so that we would work with you in whatever way that makes the most sense for your organization to engage the right kind of folks. We anticipate at least one or two in-person discussions and meetings out in Palo Alto with the folks. There's something about being close to Stanford, but also being close to Bob and his folks. It just gets you a little bit away from DC and you're both corporate settings, and you start thinking in broader terms, and it's very, very healthy. So we'd anticipate one or two of those kind of activities, and then a series probably of conference calls and discussions as we start to zero in on what that map would be. And maybe, Bob, if you would take this kind of the next step, once the data and the information is input, how do you see it being packaged and then shared with the folks who are going to be the project participants?
Yes. And there's a related question also. Someone asked just about timeline. So we're looking for a minimum funding level, which Steve has just specified. Once we hit that, the project will be about 6 months at a minimum. depending on how we can schedule whatever in-person experiences are built into this, but roughly 6 months. And the question then is just how would it be packaged and distributed? So the deliverable would be a revised version of the map in a more focused format. Right now, this one, as I said before, is too busy compared to what we do now. What we've generally found is that for executives to find a custom forecast like this useful, it has to be more focused. So it has to be 4 or 5 future forces, and it has to be focused on what are the activities. So we will be creating a new forecast map with presentation materials associated with that, so that it'll be a kind of annotated PowerPoint, if you will, that will allow you to use the map in your organizations, not just in a PDF or print form, but also in a virtual form that would be a kind of PowerPoint slide library from which you could draw to present for different audiences when we're not with you.
And let me add too that I think one of the important things is that this is not one of those situations where you don't see or learn anything before the end of the project, be that 6 months, whatever that time frame is. It is that every step along the process, I'd be willing to bet you will continue to learn and gain knowledge that can be a deliverable back into your organization. When we got the first time of the first map, when we got all those good people sitting around the table, the dynamics in the room were just smashing. I mean, there's so much good energy, and you've got so many great thoughts that come from a cross-sectional business community that where you think you're kind of off in your own world, but you start to realize that everybody's starting to think in very similar kinds of ways. And the question then is how you utilize that. How do you then take that knowledge and expand that both inside your organization, but also expand that through other organizations and entities that you all are collectively members of. So there's a value proposition at every stage in the process. Are there additions? Bob, you want to add anything to that?
No, other than amen.
Are there additional? Yeah, go ahead.
This is Bill from Smithfield. Again, I participated in the initial process, and I would amen Bob's amen there. The insight foresight back and forth as we worked to develop this end product of a map was really where I think I felt I achieved a lot of the value of the process. The map is so involved and so detailed because, of course, the situation forecasting forward is very involved and can be very detailed. And so being part of the process of developing the map probably was more valuable. The map did give me a product to go back and explain to management, what we needed to draw from it. But I already knew that without the map by being part of the process.
Great, thank you, Bill. Okay, you know what? I'll tell you what, folks. If there are no additional questions, Ross, I'm going to turn it back to you. But I want to thank you so much for hosting this call for us this afternoon, and the continued collaborative relationship that GEMI has with National Association of Manufacturers. You all are a great asset, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you, Bob and Ari, for being part of this. And Ross, how about I hand it, and then Bill, and Ross, how about I hand it back to you to close it out? And thanks very much.
Oh, well, actually, this is Laura Berkey-Ames. I'm going to go ahead and close out the call. Ross had to step away. So my apologies that he couldn't be here at the very end, but just wanted to thank, again, not to sound like a broken record, since there's been a lot of thanks going around, but truly Bill and Kellen and Steve, many thanks for you guys for bringing this opportunity to the Sustainability Task Force. I would encourage all of our participants, if you are interested in engaging on this project, or even if you want to learn even more than what we the understanding that we gained during this call to please reach out to our panelists. And many thanks to everybody for taking the time to participate.
Okay, thank you from our side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You too. Bye. Bye-bye.